There are moments when the world suddenly holds its breath, and it feels as if time itself has slipped from our hands. Night descends not to lull us into sleep, but to awaken the stories buried thousands of years beneath the dust of history. And today, we stand before one of those stories, a story even the ancient scriptures seemed hesitant to speak of. A story people mentioned only with a quiet, uneasy whisper. Somewhere in the barren lands of Egypt, beneath stones scorched by the breath of the desert, a manuscript lay motionless for nearly 2 millennia. No sound, no witness, no understanding, only the desert wind sighing through the cracks, as if trying to protect a secret humanity had never been ready to face. That manuscript bore a name that made many tremble, not because it was dangerous, but because it touched a wound humanity has never truly healed. The Gospel of Judas, the so-called traitor, the man condemned by generations, judged by stories repeated so many times that we forgot something simple, yet profound, that behind every name lies a human being, with a heart capable of love, fear, hesitation, and pain. As I read the first restored lines from the torn Coptic pages, something shifted softly within me. Not curiosity, not suspicion, but a feeling akin to hearing a familiar voice you once thought was lost forever. As though Judas had never vanished into the shadows of history. He had simply waited, in silence, for someone willing to listen with a more open heart. And then, a question began to form, quiet at first, then unmistakable, like a crack spreading across a still lake. What truly happened to Judas? Why did a man who walked beside Jesus every day, who shared the most private and intimate conversations with him, become the symbol of betrayal for nearly 2,000 years? Or perhaps, we were only ever told half the story. As this silence widens around us, I want to invite you into this journey. A slow, deep journey that may make you look inward in ways you did not expect. And if you feel something stir within you as this tale unfolds, if a part of you senses there is more hidden beneath the pages of history, then consider subscribing to this channel. Not for the numbers, but so you won't miss any piece of the truth we're about to uncover together. Because sometimes, it is the stories buried the deepest that change the way we see humanity, faith, and ourselves. When we speak of the appearance of the divine, most people imagine blinding light, thunderous signs, or a presence so overwhelming it forces the soul to its knees. Yet what the ancient manuscript describes is nothing like that. There was no blazing radiance, no trembling earth. Only a young man whose eyes were deep and quiet, as though he could see through the silence between a human heart and itself. Jesus stepped among his disciples not with a display of power, but with a stillness so gentle that anyone near him felt exposed yet strangely comforted, as if finally seen for who they truly were. He did not need to ask questions. His gaze alone made each man confront the hidden pieces of his own soul. The disciples whispered that their teacher was impossible to understand, at times close like an elder brother, at times distant, as though he belonged to another realm, a place where light breathed softly and truth cut as sharply as a blade. Yet in that moment, none of them could grasp what was truly unfolding. None except Judas, the man history remembers with a single word: betrayal. But here, in this forgotten text, Judas does not stand under the shadow of accusation. He stands within a narrow circle of understanding, one that only those who have wandered in their own darkness can recognize. When Jesus approached, the air seemed to shift. The disciples felt confused by how long the teacher's eyes lingered on Judas. Not a look of blame, not suspicion, but something far deeper. So, knowing that Judas had to lower his gaze, as if the truth within him was being uncovered layer by layer. In that long silence, Jesus did not offer Judas promises, nor did he give him a holy task. Instead, he said something tender yet heavy as destiny itself. Only those who have seen the darkness within themselves can truly understand the worth of light. The words sent a chill through Judas, not of fear, but of recognition. He realized that the teacher saw him more clearly than anyone ever had. And that gaze did not condemn him. It invited him. It called him toward a path only those brave enough to face the truth could walk. The disciples did not know that this quiet encounter would become the first step in a chain of revelations that would shake everything they thought they understood. And Judas, returning that night with a heart heavy as stone, felt within that stone a faint glimmer of light, fragile yet unyielding. A light that would lead him into a journey the world would remember only as betrayal, though the ancient manuscript names it differently. It calls it sacrifice. From the day Jesus looked at Judas with an understanding so deep it frightened him, the air among the disciples began to shift. No one spoke of it openly, yet uneasiness crept into every glance, every whispered question. At night, the flickering fire cast trembling shadows across their young, uncertain faces, as if each man clung desperately to what he once believed while something inside him quietly cracked. The disciples murmured about the strange things Jesus had said. Why did the teacher smile when they spoke of loyalty? Why did he claim that those who thought themselves closest to the light might in fact be the farthest away? They did not understand that his smile was not mockery. Hello, I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. Like the wind slipping through a door at night, gentle enough to ignore, yet powerful enough to keep him awake. At times, when the disciples argued about heaven and miracles, Judas realized these no longer felt like the questions that mattered. What haunted him now was something simpler, yet far heavier. Was there something hidden in the teacher's words meant only for him? And why him? Judas was no scholar, no priest, no man of exceptional virtue. He was simply human, with real flaws and real wounds he never managed to hide from himself. Yet Jesus had chosen him for the conversations no one else was allowed to hear. The realization felt like both an honor and a burden, as though someone had placed in his hands a fragile lamp he did not know how to protect. One evening, as the disciples quarreled over who would be greatest in the kingdom of heaven, Jesus approached them with a rare sadness in his eyes. He told them they understood nothing of light, because light did not belong to those who sought position, but to those who dared face the darkness within themselves. The group fell silent. All lowered their heads except Judas, not because he understood the full meaning, but because the darkness in his own chest stirred as though those words had been spoken directly to him. Judas's faith began to tremble, not because he doubted Jesus, but because he was doubting everything he once thought he knew about faith itself. He stood between two paths, neither clear, both heavy with consequences he could not predict. And in that blur of uncertainty, a realization slowly took shape. Sometimes, to see the true light, a person must first pass through a darkness far deeper than anything they ever imagined. Judas sensed his journey was about to shift, leading him into places where nothing would remain simple. And in that unease, he began to hear the quiet footsteps of destiny approaching, steady and deliberate, like the heartbeat of a story waiting to be revealed. While the disciples were still tangled in small arguments about power and miracles, Jesus took Judas far beyond anything an ordinary human mind could imagine. Not to a high mountain, nor into a sacred temple, but into a quiet space where light and shadow blended like the breath of another world. He spoke softly, yet his words rang inside Judas like a bell struck deep beneath the earth. There are truths not meant for the many, not because they are unworthy, but because they lack the courage to see with eyes stripped of illusion. Then Jesus began to speak of the origin of the universe, not as the scriptures had written, but as if a veil long forgotten had been lifted for the first time in thousands of years. He spoke of the great invisible spirit, the one who belongs to no form, no boundary, no anger, no punishment, the source of light that every soul instinctively longs to return to. He spoke of Barbelo, the first manifestation, the heart of that light, both mother and breath, the fountain from which life unfolds endlessly. Judas felt the world tilt beneath him. Nothing he heard resembled the teachings he had memorized since childhood. Jesus looked at him as if he could read the storm turning inside his chest. "I know this is difficult, but the truth always wounds before it frees." Then Jesus spoke of the realms above, of rulers, humans mistook for gods, beings who controlled the material world yet stood far beneath the true light. And most startling of all, he revealed a creator who was not perfect, a being who fashioned this world out of his own misunderstanding, believing himself supreme though he was merely a shard of light separated from its true source. A chill ran through Judas's body. He had always been taught that the world was crafted by a single all-powerful God. Now, the teacher told him there was one far beyond every name mortals had ever spoken. Jesus continued, as if trying to free Judas from the small, rigid box in which the world had placed faith for centuries. Humanity carries within itself a spark of the true light. No one is born filthy or condemned. They simply forget where they came from. Judas felt something open inside him, like a door he did not know existed. Part of him was terrified because the foundation of his beliefs was crumbling. But another part felt an unexpected relief, as though he had finally found the answer to the restlessness he had never dared express. "The other disciples will never understand this," Jesus said, "not because they are lesser, but because their hearts still seek safety, not truth. But you, Judas, have faced the darkness in yourself. That is why you can see the true light." Judas lowered his head, not out of shame, but because he felt the weight of what was being entrusted to him. He knew then that the path ahead would set him apart from every other follower. And though fear trembled in him, retreat was no longer possible. Once a person sees the truth, they cannot return to the old darkness. That night, Judas looked up at the sky. The stars hung in place as they always had. Yet for the first time, he felt as if another world was watching him back. A vast, silent world filled with a calling he could no longer ignore. And he knew his destiny had already begun to turn its next page. After the revelations that had shaken the very foundation of Judas's faith, Jesus led him into a vision even more unsettling. As if to unveil the darkest layer of the world humanity believed to be sacred. The space around them blurred, then brightened into the shape of a magnificent temple. Towering columns, flames of sacrifice rising high, rows of priests in white robes moving with the solemnity Judas had always admired. He remembered the ceremonies of his childhood, when he was told that this blood pleased God. But now, all he felt was pain and emptiness. Jesus placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him as the truth crashed over his heart. This is not light. This is the house of those who do not understand the one they claim to serve. The chants, the prayers, the rituals that once seemed holy were now exposed as endless cycles of fear and blindness. Judas swallowed hard. He saw ordinary people pushed outside the temple gates, the poor left waiting like forgotten souls. They longed for even a drop of grace, yet were turned away by those called the keepers of the path to God. Jesus looked at Judas, his eyes carrying a grief too vast for words. "Do you understand why I did not choose them? Their hearts are full of rules but empty of compassion. They build temples for me, yet construct walls to block the light." Judas felt dizzy. He had always believed the keepers of the temple were closest to God. But now he saw them as wanderers lost in the very house they claimed to guard. Then the vision shifted. Judas saw a small group of humble people sitting outside the temple walls, their eyes fixed on the light but afraid to approach. Jesus whispered, like wind slipping through a newly opened door, "The light belongs to them. To those who know they are nothing. To the weak who refuse to lie to themselves." Judas felt his heart ache. What he was seeing was not condemnation, but a reminder that the world could be wrong at the place it believed itself most righteous. And he began to understand why the teacher had chosen him, a man with no position, no priestly authority, no power. It was because he had dared to face the darkness in himself, and therefore could recognize the darkness of an entire system. When the vision faded, Judas stood motionless. The world around him remained the same, but he was no longer the same. And he knew the truth he had just witnessed would lead him to steps he could no longer avoid. After the visions that left Judas unable to see the world the way he once had, Jesus called him aside one quiet night. Moonlight fell across the empty ground, casting a gentle glow on the teacher's face. A glow so calm it felt as though he already knew the words he was about to speak would alter Judas's soul forever. Judas stood before him, fingers gripping the edge of his cloak. He felt small, exposed, like a child stripped of his last defenses. Jesus looked at him with a tenderness so deep that every layer Judas used to protect himself simply dissolved. "You believe I choose the strongest, the purest, the most worthy. But that is only how humans imagine the choices of God." Judas lowered his head. He knew he was not among the noble or admirable. He carried shadows, hesitation, and the quiet shame of things he barely dared name. And because of that, he could not understand why Jesus seemed to see him more clearly than anyone else. Jesus stepped closer, his voice low and warm. "I did not choose you because you are strong. I chose you because you know you are weak. I did not choose you because you are good. I chose you because you see the darkness in yourself and do not flee from it." Judas lifted his gaze, heart pounding. No one had ever spoken to him like this. All his life he had been taught that God loved the righteous and punished the sinful. Yet Jesus stood before him saying the opposite, saying that weakness was the opening through which light entered. The realization made Judas want to cry and run all at once. "Only those who see their own fear can understand my loneliness," Jesus continued. "And because you understand, you can carry what others cannot." Judas trembled. He did not know if this trust was a blessing or a burden. But in that moment, he felt something he had never dared imagine. That Jesus saw in him something he himself had never recognized. Yet this truth came wrapped in a quiet ache. If Jesus trusted him at such a depth, it meant Judas would soon be led into places no other disciple would ever touch. He would bear truths that would make the whole world misunderstand him. And he would walk that path alone, with only the memory of the one who had entrusted him with it. Jesus placed a hand on his shoulder, gentle as a prayer. "You are chosen not for honor, but to understand a part of the light no one else dares to touch. And there will be times when the world calls you by cruel names. But I know who you are." That single sentence tightened something deep in Judas's chest. An invisible distance formed between him and the other disciples. Not rejection, but a silence without a name, as if they now stood on opposite banks of the same river. Yet for Judas, that silence opened a doorway. He felt the teacher often looked at him with the gaze of someone who had something to say, not to the many, but to a soul capable of bearing the weight of truth. One late afternoon, when the sun poured its final light across the earth, Jesus motioned for Judas to follow him. They sat beneath an ancient olive tree, its gnarled trunk shaped by centuries of human longing. A light breeze passed through, carrying the scent of dust, sky, and something sacred approaching. Jesus spoke first, not with the tone of a master teaching a student, but like an old friend speaking to one who finally understands. "Do you know why you see what they cannot?" Judas shook his head. He feared answering. Feared exposing the insecurity he carried, an insecurity that had shadowed him all his life. Jesus studied him for a long moment. "Because you do not pretend. You do not hide your fear. You do not bury your wounds. A soul like that feels pain easily, but it also hears the whisper of light more clearly than others." The words struck Judas deeply. All his life, he had believed his fragility made him unworthy, a burden among stronger men. But Jesus was telling him that the very cracks he hated were what made him different. Jesus looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. Every soul has its origin. Their glory is not in how strong they become, but in how honest they are before their own darkness. Judas felt himself standing before an invisible threshold. He was not wise, not powerful, not honored, yet he possessed something he had never recognized. A painful kind of sincerity. Then Jesus spoke the sentence Judas would never forget. "Every soul has a guiding star. And yours, Judas, shines brighter than you believe." Judas lowered his gaze, overwhelmed. He had never imagined he held any worth beyond silent loyalty. Yet the teacher said there was a light within him, faint but enduring, enough to lead him down a path none of the others could walk. In that moment of stillness, Judas suddenly asked, "What do you see in me that makes you trust me so much?" Jesus smiled, a soft smile like wind passing gently over grass. "I see a soul unafraid to face itself. And that is the rarest thing in this world." Judas said nothing more. He feared that if he spoke, the rising tide of emotion within him would break into tears. He only knew that this conversation, unheard by any other, had bound his soul to Jesus in a way that went far beyond teacher and disciple. It was the meeting of two souls who understood that light does not only live in the heavens, but also within the fractures of human imperfection. And for the first time in his life, Judas did not feel lost. He did not know where the path would lead, but he knew he would walk it. Because in the eyes of the one he followed, he had finally been given something he had never possessed: a new definition of his own worth. After the conversation beneath the ancient olive tree, Judas began to see the world with different eyes. What once felt familiar now seemed distant, and what once frightened him now felt strangely close. Every step, every breath, every word Jesus spoke reflected something back into the deepest part of him, leaving him unable to hide from himself any longer. One night, while the other disciples slept, Judas sat alone beside the dying fire. The faint flames crackled softly, casting a red glow across his weary face. There were moments he wished he had never been chosen to hear such truths. For once, truth touches a soul. It never returns the peace that ignorance once offered. Judas wondered why the teacher saw something in him that he himself had never recognized. Why, among so many men more righteous and stronger than he, Jesus had seen a glimmer of light within the one who doubted himself most. He remembered what the teacher said, that his soul had a guiding star. A star he had never dared believe belonged to him. Judas closed his eyes, trying to listen for that star. But what he heard instead was the trembling beat of his own heart, a rhythm of fear, hope, and unspoken wounds. He saw clearly all the things he had buried. The flicker of jealousy when other disciples received praise, the moments of weakness when he questioned the path before him, and the fierce, painfully human longing to be seen by the one he followed, to know that his quiet efforts were not invisible. For the first time, Judas looked at his whole self without disgust and without pretending. He simply acknowledged the light and the darkness within him, as if that acceptance itself was the first step toward understanding why he had been chosen. At that moment, Jesus appeared silently, as though he had been there from the beginning. Judas startled, but the teacher's eyes calmed him instantly. Jesus sat beside him, watching the fire fade into embers. "What do you see when you look at yourself?" Judas hesitated, then answered truthfully, "I see someone unworthy, but I also see something I cannot name." Jesus smiled softly. "What you see is not ugliness. It is truth. And truth always makes the soul tremble, because it is never comfortable." Judas lowered his head. Jesus placed his hand over Judas's heart, where it beat fast beneath the cloak. "Light begins here. Not in perfection, but in honesty." The words felt like a place Judas could finally rest, a harbor he had searched for all his life. He understood then that his path would not begin in strength, but in the courage to face wounds that had long remained unhealed. And that was what set him apart. That night, while the world slept, Judas felt something lighten within him, as though a burden he had carried unknowingly for years had finally loosened its grip. He did not know what awaited him, but for the first time, he felt ready to look directly at it, because he had finally looked directly at himself. After Judas finally saw himself clearly, as if a long-infected wound had been opened to the light, he thought his heart would feel lighter. But truth never arrives without demanding its price. The more he understood, the heavier something pressed upon his shoulders. It was not the fear of being judged by others, but the fear that he might not be strong enough to carry what Jesus had begun placing in his hands. In the days that followed, Jesus spoke words that baffled the other disciples but struck Judas like a blade wrapped in sorrow. The teacher spoke of the Son of Man being handed over, of light needing to leave the flesh in order to return to its origin. The disciples were confused, unable to grasp why he spoke of death with such calm. But Judas understood. Or rather, he felt the quiet grief behind every word. One evening, as they rested beside a stream, Jesus called Judas to him. Moonlight danced upon the water, creating ripples of silver like layers of truth overlapping, ungraspable yet undeniable. Jesus looked at him for a long moment, then spoke a sentence that felt like dropping through an endless void. "You will surpass all of them, because you will offer up the body that clothes me." Judas felt his heart stop. His blood ran cold. He could not comprehend how handing over the teacher could be an act of greatness or even obedience. Yet Jesus' eyes held no accusation, only acceptance. Only the gentle trust Judas had never seen from anyone else. Judas whispered, barely able to breathe, "What do you want me to do?" Jesus placed a hand on his chest, as though giving him strength to bear what was coming. Not betrayal, fulfillment. A part of the design only you understand. You will be misunderstood. You will carry names heavy with hatred. But you know the truth, and that truth will free me from the chains of flesh. The words cut deeply. Judas did not know which hurt more, the act he was being asked to perform, or the knowledge that the entire world would forever look at him with anger. Yet behind the fear rose something stronger, the absolute trust Jesus placed in him, a quiet flame that refused to extinguish even in the storm. Judas asked, "Are you not afraid?" Jesus lifted his gaze toward the sky, where the stars shone brighter than usual. "I fear as you fear, but neither of us walks for ourselves. We walk for a light greater than life." Judas felt his eyes burn. He realized that once he carried out this act, he would no longer belong among his companions. He would be separated from them, rejected by history, cursed by generations yet unborn. But when he looked into Jesus' eyes, He understood that some paths cannot be measured by praise or acceptance. Some actions only make sense when seen through the eyes of light, not through the stories people tell. Jesus took Judas's hand, gripping it firmly, binding their souls in a bond no one else would ever understand. "You will not walk alone." Judas nodded, though tears slipped down his face. Not the tears of a weak man, but of a soul that knew truth was placing upon him a burden no one else could bear. And in that silent night, Judas understood that every step ahead would take him closer to what the world would call betrayal. But he knew, deep within, it was not betrayal. It was the weight of truth, whispered to him by the teacher himself. From the moment Jesus placed into Judas's hands a truth no one else was allowed to hear, every passing day felt like stepping across a narrow bridge that vanished behind him with each footfall. He knew he was walking toward a place no one could follow. But knowing it was one thing, feeling it with his whole heart was another. One evening, as the sun faded over the rooftops of Jerusalem, the air thickened with an unspoken dread. The disciples buzzed with fear from rumors spreading through the city, whispers that groups were searching for Jesus. They argued, planned, tried to find ways to hide him. Only Judas remained silent. He stood apart, watching Jesus' shadow stretch across the ground. And in that moment he understood with piercing clarity that the path of the teacher was not to avoid what was coming. It was to fulfill it. And Judas would be the one to open the door for that fulfillment. Fear tightened around his chest like an invisible hand. He was not only afraid for Jesus, he was afraid of himself. Afraid that in the final hour, he might falter. That weakness might betray the trust Jesus had placed in him. But then, Jesus turned and looked at him. No words. No push. No demand. Only a gaze, soft as a touch upon the soul. A gaze that said he knew. He understood. He accepted. And he stood with Judas, even knowing the act ahead would cause the world to misunderstand him forever. That night, in the cramped upper room of a small house, Jesus and the disciples gathered for supper. The air was heavy, as if everyone sensed something approaching but could not name it. When Jesus spoke of the one who would hand him over, the room seemed to stop breathing. Each man denied it, terrified of being named the betrayer. Judas sat still, his back straight, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He knew their eyes searched for weakness, for guilt. Yet none of them saw that Jesus, the one they loved, was placing his deepest trust in the one they least suspected. When Jesus handed Judas the piece of bread, time froze. Long enough for Judas to feel the warmth of his hand. Long enough to understand this was not condemnation. It was confirmation. The hour had come. As Judas rose from the table, his shadow cut across the room like a blade through silence. No one called him back. No one knew he carried both a fragment of the light and a fragment of the darkness of a destiny only he and Jesus understood. On the road leading down from the house, the night wind pushed hard against him, tugging at his cloak. He shivered, not from cold, but because he knew that once his knuckles struck the door of the priests, his life would split in two. His name, his story, his soul would no longer belong to him. They would belong to the tale the world would tell, a tale missing half its truth. But Judas kept walking. Each step felt like the final one, yet each step was necessary to fulfill the trust Jesus had placed upon him. And when the door opened, when the torchlight revealed the faces of the priests, Judas understood he had entered the moment of no return. A moment after which the world would call him by one name, but the teacher would call him by one purpose. From the moment Judas stepped through the priest's doorway, a part of his soul seemed to break away from the world he once knew. As he walked through the dusty streets of Jerusalem, It felt as if his feet were treading on a different realm entirely. A place where every sound drifted far away and his heart carried the weight of the whole night sky. He had done what Jesus needed him to do. But understanding is one thing. Bearing the weight of it is another. When Judas returned to the place where the disciples were hiding, he stood at a distance and watched through a narrow gap in the door. He saw Jesus speaking to them, the oil lamp casting a soft glow across his face. A glow so peaceful it made Judas's throat tighten. The teacher knew everything. He knew who had left, who would panic, who would run away in fear. And yet, he remained calm, as if every storm of the world lay within the gentle wave of his hand. Judas stepped back. He could not bring himself to enter. He could not face the friends who would never understand what he had done. They would see betrayal. But Jesus saw obedience. They would see sin. But Jesus saw an offering. Judas leaned against the cold stone wall and closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, he could hear the footsteps of soldiers approaching, the clatter of armor, the crackle of torches. He took a deep breath. This was no longer a place for hesitation. He had to finish the path he had begun. When he led the soldiers to Jesus, all sound seemed to fade except for the pounding of his own heart. Jesus stepped out of the shadows, his face illuminated by torchlight. From a soul entrusted with a truth he must carry to the end. As the soldiers seized Jesus, Judas stepped back. No one saw his hands clenched so tightly they bled. No one saw the pain twisting through his chest like a blade slowly turning. But Jesus saw. He turned and looked at Judas one last time. That gaze held no anger, no disappointment. Only one thing: recognition. Judas stood frozen, a statue carved by the night. He did not run. He did not hide. He only watched the torches carry the teacher farther and farther away, each step pulling at a cord wrapped around his heart. He knew he had given up everything. But he also knew this was the only path through which the full light could be revealed. When the streets fell dark once more, Judas stood alone in the cold silence. And he understood that sometimes, to open a doorway for light, a soul must pay a price heavier than any story history is willing to tell. And tonight, that price rested entirely within him. After Jesus was taken away, Judas stood in the darkness like a man who had lost the entire world. The wind brushed across the silent rooftops, carrying the scent of dust and an emptiness spreading through his chest like a vast, shoreless sea. No one knew where he was. No one called his name. No one understood what he had done or for whom he had done it. Yet, in that solitude, Judas heard something he had heard only in the private moments when the teacher spoke to him alone. A whisper light as breath. No blame. No judgment. Only a reminder that everything unfolding lay within a circle of light that no other eyes could fully see. Judas wandered through the dark streets, each narrow alley murmuring like the voices of lost souls. The entire city seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. And he understood. When light is about to leave the world, darkness thrashes more violently than ever. But instead of fear, Judas felt a strange note of brightness inside him, faint but clear, as if closing his eyes might reveal Jesus' face glowing like mist-lit dawn. At daybreak, Judas followed the crowd to the place where Jesus was being judged. He did not dare get close, yet from afar he saw the teacher's face, serene in a way that made Judas ache. There was no anger, no despair, only the quiet acceptance of one who had already embraced every path before him. For a moment, Jesus looked through the sea of people, and Judas, though standing far away, knew that gaze was searching for him. In that look, there was no condemnation, Only one final message spoken without words. You have done what needed to be done. When the sentence was declared, the crowd roared like a storm-torn sea. Judas felt his legs weaken. He could neither flee nor approach. He stood suspended between two worlds, the world of men, loud with judgment, and the world of Jesus, where every event carried a meaning deeper than human minds could fathom. As Jesus carried the cross through the narrow street, each step echoed inside Judas, like something tearing open in his chest. Jesus did not avoid his gaze. Even with his body bleeding, his eyes remained warm, shining with the same light as the nights they had spoken under the old olive tree. And in that moment, Judas finally understood what he had only known with his mind before. Light sometimes must leave the world through the darkest possible path, so those lost in darkness may realize light still exists for them to return to. When Jesus breathed his last, it felt to Judas as though the entire sky collapsed inside him. Yet strangely, it was not darkness that engulfed him. It was a silence so deep he felt he was standing between two realms. A silence not meant to terrify, but to cleanse. Like the hush after a storm when the ground still trembles. Yet the sky above has never been clearer. Judas knew a part of his soul had died with the teacher. But another part was illuminated by that very pain. A light no one else could see. A light only he would carry. And in that moment, Judas understood that his journey was not ending. For the departure of light from the world was only the beginning of light awakening within the human heart. When all the noise of the city had faded, when the soldiers' footsteps dissolved into the night, Judas stood alone in the vast emptiness of destiny. No more torches. No more shouting. No more faces turned toward him. Only the wind brushing against stone walls and the sound of his own heartbeat echoing like a question without an answer. The world would one day call him a traitor, would carve his name into the anger of history. But in this moment, with only the sky as witness, Judas knew that truth was never as simple as a story shaped by fear and judgment. He remembered every word the teacher had spoken to him. The gentle gaze that entrusted him with a task no other dared receive. The hand placed over his heart, telling him that light begins in the very wounds humans try hardest to hide. Those memories did not ease Judas's pain, but they helped him stand. For he understood that some souls are not born to be praised, but to carry pieces of truth the world is not yet ready to accept. Judas walked to the quietest place he could find outside the city walls. Dawn had not yet broken. The earth was cold. The last stars were sinking toward the horizon. He looked up, and for a brief moment he thought he saw the star. Jesus had spoken of the star that guided his soul. It was not brilliant. It did not blaze across the sky. It shone softly, humbly, yet firmly, like the final breath of a promise. Judas placed a hand over his chest. The pain was still there, raw and deep enough to steal his breath. But it was no longer a burden consuming him. It had become a place where light could live. He understood now that his journey did not end on the night Jesus was taken. His journey ended in the hearts of those willing to see this story through different eyes of humanity, of compassion, of the ability to find beauty even in the souls the world calls unforgivable. Then Judas closed his eyes and whispered, as if speaking to the one who is listening now. If someday your heart feels heavy with things no one understands, if you are called by names that are not yours, if you carry mistakes the world sees only in half, remember this: even in darkness, there is always a star for you. A star that shines only when you are brave enough to face yourself. As I once did, Judas did not need forgiveness from the world. He needed only to be seen with the eyes of truth. And if you have listened this far, perhaps your heart too is searching for a path through its own shadows. Judas leaves you with one final truth. Light does not descend only from the sky. Light comes from souls who dare face their darkness and turn it into a place where light can live. And so, though this story closes, it never truly ends. It continues in the hearts of those still searching for themselves. Like you. In this very moment,